Hello, and welcome to another fully live episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Kody Kinzie. I am a security researcher at Varonis, and today we have my friend and fellow hacker Killian on, re-embodied this time, to talk about the hacker news of the week. Killian, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good to be back. Thank you for having me again. I'm glad my camera's working this time. We'll just go from there.
Yeah, well, our streaming service, Restream, which we've been having trouble with, has automatically yet again downgraded us to 720 max. So if you're wondering why our skin looks so smooth and we look so good, it's because we went back, like 5-10 years in streaming technology, and now we've been unexpectedly downgraded. But who cares? So yeah, if we look a little bit extra pixelated, it's not our fault. We did our best. So lots to talk about this week. We had a highly anticipated potentially weekend ruining thing drop yesterday that everybody was very tense about. We'll talk about that. And then Killian, I also wanted to show you my simple add-on that I've been working on. So I think I told you that Hackaday SuperCon is coming up very soon. Yep. And there's a challenge to use this this standard called the simple add-on, or shitty add-on, some people also call it, to create something that plugs into one of the primary badges and does something delightful, cool, interesting. And usually these are like simple blinky badges or other things, but my friends and I have been working on our own versions of this. And at this point, I've taken the step of testing out the exact hardware I intend on using, breadboarding it, testing it out on a badge to make sure that it can, in fact, be powered as a simple add-on. And I managed to create a prototype that I think works pretty well. So I'm going to show that off real quick before we get to the news. All right. So it's always a little dangerous to do live demos. I'm delighting doing them. Let me turn off this screen. All right. So how do I make this bigger? Maximize. There we go. All right. So the idea is I'm going to have a little kind of tarot card that has a big old clock. And this is the kind of style example that I traded to get at DEF CON. I love these. And this plate is actually controlled by this little microcontroller. It's the size of like a postage stamp. And it's going to sort through the wireless spectrum. And it's going to divide packets by what channel they're on. So 1 to 12. That's why you have to clock. And then it's going to also sort the packets by what type of packet they are. So let me turn on this badge it's plugged into, which is actually the badge that we designed for DEF CON a little bit late, but we'll have them for a SuperCon. And hopefully I wired this correctly. All right, it turns on. There we go. Powers up. And now it's detecting packets. And every time it sees a green packet, that means that there's a wireless device on that channel that's searching for an access point to join. When we see yellow, those are other management packets like probe or wireless handshakes or like data being exchanged. And then the blue is access points announcing themselves on that channel. So just visually, this gives you an idea of exactly like what is going on around you. And the idea is like it can see the invisible, and it kind of has the ability to like visualize something that normally you wouldn't be able to see. So I'm going to be laying out the final design and making the art for it with a couple of friends. And I'll kind of be showing off my progress as I go through. But last time I had this running on a different microcontroller, but still like the same like basic setup. This is actually the hardware I intend to use. So I'm excited to submit this, and then hopefully maybe win the Hackaday contest for coolest SAO. So anyway, just wanted to show that off because I just kind of finished the code on that last week, and it was inspired by another hacker that released some code to sort packets, but it was for kind of a proprietary little like 14 by like something grid. And I wanted to make something that was a little bit more fun. So we'll see what that ends up looking like, but I'm very excited to show it off.
That's cool.
Thank you. So shall we start with the drama this week?
Let's get right into it.
Yeah. So, all right. I have this story, which I'm going to put up on the screen. So, there we go. And the idea is that we had this crazy countdown yesterday where somebody was claiming to have like a 9+ on the CVV score, like our CVV. Common vulnerabilities and exposures score, CVE, for Linux systems. And obviously anything that affects so broad of a sector is going to be a big deal. And we wanted to figure out like, okay, is this something that can be like eternal blue style, like triggered remotely and cause all these problems? Like, is this something that is like a huge deal, or is it a small deal that's being overblown? And the security community is divided. I I kind of feel like the overall response has been that this is a very serious vulnerability. It doesn't necessarily paint the Linux maintainers in a great light in some cases, because it seems like the researcher here got very frustrated by the vulnerability disclosure process and had some beef with the process, and decided to basically put this out on a short time frame because it was also leaked on a darknet forum several days ago already. So up here on my screen, I have some of the drama that was kind of disclosed this week. So the countdown kind of ended, and the researcher, who goes by Evil Socket, disclosed that Cups, a printer plugin, is what is responsible for this vulnerability. It comes pre-installed in basically all Linux distros, but there are some catches here. And the program to disclose this responsibly apparently resulted in the maintainers arguing over whether or not this was actually a vulnerability that needed to get fixed. Some people apparently were not able to proceed with getting these fixes out because of these like arguments and discussions within the open source community. And then there was also the maintainer of Cups was apparently also putting out patches that directly were like addressing some of the things that was embargoed until like everybody could push patches. So the researcher came on and was just like, are you aware that you're pushing like updates to this that are directly covered, you know, under this embargo? Like basically we're trying to get this fixed, and you're pushing patches that show exactly what the vulnerability was. And the maintainer was just like, no, this is not a problem. We're not covered under those terms because this is technically a separate project. To which the maintainer, to which the researcher replied, are you for fucking real, man? Do you think people are stupid? And then the thread was locked. So very public fights kind of spilling out over the way that this very, very serious vulnerability was addressed. And the researcher community is kind of reacting here. Now, I looked up the researcher here, and I already knew this username as soon as I saw it. I was like, oh, BetterCap. Like I remember this guy. And this guy who is associated with a lot of like projects that people know about and respect, like Ponagachi. Like everybody's kind of heard of that. BetterCap. Like I've done multiple videos talking about BetterCap. So seeing a security researcher arguing with the open source community about whether or not this was like a real problem, or like if they were properly following the terms of disclosure, just it gave me a migraine from the stress, like just from a distance. So before we even get into what this vulnerability was, the drama around this was talking about how in a lot of ways the process for this was very, very broken, and the researcher felt kind of burned by this entire thing. So we went ahead and published all of the details of this and went into a lot of detail. So our researchers at Varonis went through, kind of broke this down and made it a bit more clear because it was very lengthy. And I kind of want to go through what exactly was disclosed here. So this vulnerability in Cups was disclosed by Simone Margatelli, also AKA Evil Socket. And I have seen Cups on all sorts of Linux printers since the very beginning of me getting started with this. So Killian, do you know what Cups is, like generally, like what it does?
Yeah, it's the print system, the print subsystem for Unix systems. I don't think I've ever hooked up a printer to like a Linux or Unix system, but I know it like exists always.
Yeah, it's something that's always there, and there are a couple factors that need to be met in order to trigger this vulnerability. So I wanted to dedicate some time to this because I was tagged by the biggest Linux nerd that I know in this story before anybody else was kind of like got wind of it. And people were very tense going into, you know, the disclosure of this, like not knowing if it was going to ruin their weekend. Because if this was something that was, you know, enabled by default, installed on everything, then we've got a really serious problem here, because lots of things run on Linux. And you know, Windows had its little CrowdStrike problem not that long ago. A follow-up Linux issue would be pretty unsettling to just the general stability of systems that we rely on. So all right, so let's dive into this. What exactly is going on here? So when all these things are chained together, then it theoretically allows you to remotely take over a system that is connected and running the service. Now, there are some caveats here. They all need to be abused together in order to create a successful exploit chain. And there is user interaction that is required. However, in certain environments, that user interaction might be a part of daily life, and it might just be something that you can rely on. In other cases, you can expect that to be done virtually never. And even though the conditions for this attack may be met and the attack may be primed and may never be executed. So I'll give some examples of that. So details of this information were leaked on September 24th. And that's kind of the back and forth I was talking about. The researcher Evil Socket here was very frustrated that the information that they had submitted in the hopes that it would get fixed before disclosure was apparently exfiltrated and posted. So this was something that was already disclosed to the hacker community well before it was like publicly announced to the rest of the public. And that's why the researcher felt like it was time to disclose this. A lot of people in the comments were just like, you're not following the rules of disclosure. You know, you shouldn't be dumping this information. But the problem here seems from the receipts posted online and then also from the just reading what happened, that they tried to follow the disclosure process, and they felt like because this had already been leaked, it was time to just make that information available. Crazy. So relevant CVEs here, you can see more information if you want to look them up, but I think that they're more interesting in context. So if you are running the CUP software, so that means you have basically attempted to add a printer at some point to the system. And this might be running by default on some Linux systems, but it is, as I said, installed by default in all. So if you've got a Linux server that's running in the cloud or something, the likelihood that it has CUPs installed is like 100%. But the likelihood that it has that service running is very, very low because there would be no reason for it. So first, the server needs to be running CUPs. You can determine that by running this command. That's something that you can do on your Linux system if you want to. But where's the, I wish that they would just do a breakdown of just like all the steps necessary to be attacked. But let's go through them. So in order to make this happen, first you need to have CUPs running, which means at some point you need to have attempted to add a printer. Next, you need to actually have that port exposed. Now on your local network, that means that anybody who's connected to your local Wi-Fi network would be able to infect you. So if you have like an evil light bulb that suddenly went rogue and started sending these requests, that's actually a real possibility for how your local network could be infected. Like if one of your IoT devices is infected by like a botnet and they start sending packets, like spraying packets to other devices on your network, the thought is if they do manage to get like a Linux machine that is handling printing to accept a malicious printer profile and then execute it, then that could infect a device on your network and start a larger infection. So there is some cause for concern here because no one's internal network is like completely secure. There's always ways in, and especially if you have IoT devices mixed in.
That's a great point because some of the stuff that I was reading, people were trying to downplay it. It's not a big deal. It's only a local network thing. But like you said, if you have something that's bridging it there, you have, you know, a IoT device that can be compromised, or if you stick a server out on the internet, well, that's a whole other problem. But just some of the stuff I was reading, it's not that big of a deal. It's like, 50-50.
And up on my screen, we also have the part of the report that's talking about how many servers are just exposed online. So 91,000 are directly exposed on the internet. So not counting all the ones that are exposed locally, where there might be an infected device on the system or a device that could, you know, like turn evil if it wanted to for nation state purposes, then we also have ones that are just straight up directly connected. So 91,000 is a lot. So, all right, so we have a couple of conditions that have been met now. We have the CUP service installed, and we have it running, and we have it able to be connected to either locally or directly over the internet. So that's 3 things already. Now we have the ability to actually get the user to press print. If we meet the first 3 conditions, then we're able to send a specially crafted packet that adds a printer with malicious settings. So it'll automatically detect it. And if the printer is then called, if the user attempts to print something, it'll automatically attempt to use this malicious profile and run the code that is inside that profile. And that is where your system would be infected and arbitrary code could be run. So that's 4 things that you need to do. You need to have it installed. That's easy. You need to have it running. That's less easy. You need to have the port exposed, and that completely depends on your situation, whether or not that's exposed to other devices, or it could be sent this magical special packet on a port that's exposed. And again, firewalls should prevent this from like an outbound network.
Right.
So if you're on, you shouldn't be exposed on the public internet unless you did it deliberately, but you're still vulnerable on private or shared networks, and that's important to note. And then the last step is you need to be printing something. So apparently Mac OS is also impacted by this, and that is a big deal. The researcher is saying, like, stay tuned for more information. On the thread that got locked, the developer was saying, no, like, you know, I'm able to update this because you know, it's separate, and that's why Mac OS is not impacted. And the researcher is like, Mac OS is absolutely impacted. So for Mac OS system, this could potentially be a big deal. We're waiting for the other shoe to drop here, but it's some really interesting research. I would say the severity is pretty serious. However, you are ruling out the vast majority of cloud-based servers that were my initial concern when I heard about this vulnerability, or when, you know, when we were talking about like very high score like vulnerabilities. So yeah, if we've got like a 9.9, which is what this was alleged to be, then that implies every computer has this installed, it's always running, and the port is directly exposed to the internet. Like, that's kind of what I assumed. So I think of the researchers who were just like, hey, this is not as big of a deal as we expected, maybe our hopes were just too high, but 9.9 implies, quote, like doomsday. Like, that's what the newspapers were running, because like, that's kind of what this means. I would give this a little bit less than that personally, just because, you know, I did really expect this to be like either wormable or like something that like has like an automated impact that could be easily exploited. And it does, you know, to like 91,000 devices. But like when we talk about things like Eternal Blue or other ones that were like really everything was vulnerable, everything was connected, that was like a huge deal. And I feel like this falls a little bit short than that. So do I feel like this vulnerability is going to ruin my weekend? No, I don't think it's going to. But it is a really interesting piece of research, and it's definitely something where the disclosure process did not work as intended. There were leaks, there were arguments, there was lack of consensus on the people who were supposed to fix this as to whether or not this was even a security issue. So yeah, big and interesting Linux drama for any Linux nerds who want to have an existential crisis while digging into this story. That's the details, but I know for sure there's a lot more information that's still coming out on this. And also stay tuned to more information from Evil Socket covering how Mac OS is vulnerable, which I think might end up being the more interesting of the disclosures.
Yeah, when I was reading this, that's what I was thinking too, is, oh, is this going to affect Macs? As someone who recently just switched back to a Mac, I'm like, oh, this is, I probably got to pay attention to this.
Yeah, no, it's a big deal. So when it comes to a consumer device that you are going to be printing more frequently, I think this attack is much more serious. So just the sheer like volume of devices that could be involved in this make it something that you have to be aware of, because like I said, your attack model like might not, you know, have you directly connected to the internet, but if you have a single IoT device that somebody can infect and cause to spray packets across the network, you could basically have all of your impacted devices seeded with this malware that goes off when you actually go to print something. And on a server, maybe not so big of a deal. On your personal device where you're printing things constantly or even just intermittently, that's where this becomes maybe a bigger concern. So stay tuned for more.
James is giving this between a 6 and a 7.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel too. Like I really don't feel like I need to, I don't know. I really don't feel like I need to like cancel any plans this weekend, I guess is what I'll say. All right, so next up we have a surprise installation.
Oh yeah.
Don't you love it when you go to bed with one piece of software and wake up with a completely different one? Well, that is what happened to people who were using Kaspersky, which apparently decided to install Ultra AV antivirus just without warning people at all. So there was some argument and back and forth as to whether or not this was communicated well to people. There was a screenshot that claims to have given all the information necessary to understand that you were actually going to be force sideloaded with like some other software. But because Kaspersky has been told that they need to vacate the US market and they can no longer provide updates to US users, they basically needed to offload this to another company, or rather like take their customers and I guess make some money off of it. This is a company that owns a lot of different services now that is running this new service that's been forcefully installed. And that provider owns a number of like VPN and VPN
Yeah.
review websites, and that is not always the most like seemly of businesses. Like there's been a lot of implications that like that's actually like a surveillance industry, like where
Right.
like you offer a bunch of like VPNs and then sell the information on the backside. Like that's a very profitable place to be, especially if you're not auditable in any way, shape, or form. So I mean, not throwing any shade there, just saying that like in the privacy and security game, these are not the most trusted companies necessarily that are running a bunch of random VPN services, and then also review services too that be a little bit biased.
Yeah. I couldn't wait to talk about that. I read that a couple days ago. That's for sure like one of those things that grandma's going to call and be like, oh my God, I'm infected with something. I can applaud them a little bit for not leaving people without coverage, but like that's unsettling. Like even as a security professional, if I saw that happening, like step 2, that computer is getting wiped.
Yeah, that's what I feel like, because you really don't like if you don't recognize a new program running on your computer, like maybe you missed the email, maybe it was never like sent to you, but either way, like that's pretty alarming, especially when you don't have an opportunity to vet the software or the company behind the software. So you might trust Kaspersky to make good decisions with that, or you might not. But the fact that they handed off customers effectively to another vendor who's involved in some other businesses that you may or may not like, that really takes the control out of customers' hands, and it probably leaves people feeling a little bit unsettled if that was suddenly done to their computer without their consent.
And I mean, at least for me, I don't spend a lot of time in the AV world anymore, but I'm not familiar with them. They're not one of the brands that I would recognize, even the smaller brands. I don't know if anybody in the chat or anything has ever heard of them or had experience with them, but that's the part that gets me. If it was like I don't know, like a Malware Bytes, I don't even know if they're around anymore, or something like that, you know, has been around, but I don't know anything about Ultra AV or who they are or what they do. And I don't know, it just sounds a bit dodgy, if you'll indulge me with that.
Yeah, well, some users also found that the VPN service was installed as well. So if they've installed Kaspersky's VPN, then it installed like Ultra VPN or something like that too. So that's obviously like having a VPN installed without your knowledge is a big deal. If you find that on your system, it usually means that somebody's creating a covert channel to do exfiltration or whatever, or to monitor what you're doing. Very, very common tactic. So having that just done without your permission is sure to spook many people, and probably just is something that, yeah, you're right, is going to get a lot of like tech support people trying to figure out what's going on when this has been done in a way that surprises and confuses people. But yeah, sets off lots of alarm bells for me anyway, to have my traffic suddenly routed through a new piece of software as a VPN. Like that's not something that I would expect to wake up and find.
Couple good ones. Clam AV is more popular somehow. I've actually heard of Clam AV, so there you go. I guess that's a point in their favor. And James says AV equals malware.
Yeah, you never know.
You can make that argument. I'm not going to say you're wrong.
All right, so actually there was something else I wanted to show off. I almost forgot. So I've been using these little Meshtastic devices. I've got one here, and this is a Lily T Echo. This is a Lily Go T Echo, and this is one of my favorite of the portable and like easy to use Meshtastic devices. But it's got limitations, you know. Like even though the antenna is really great on it, and I've got like 20 miles or so of dedicated range line of sight, I wanted to be able to like blast through obstacles a little bit more. So I decided to upgrade the antenna, and I wanted to show off the result. Let's see. This is the result. If you want to see like how big it is, actually, it is a 5 dBi antenna.
I was gonna say, are you building a lightsaber here? You know,
it's like a 5.8 dBi antenna, and I've managed to get an adapter that connects to it. So this is my like really long range rig.
Nice.
Of course, it's got all the same features as I was looking at before, which are like temperature, pressure, and humidity sensor, and then incredible range. So when you've got an antenna like this, it's basically squishing the signal to the point that it spreads out really, really far horizontally at the expense of like having any coverage vertically. So I've got a little PCB antenna in the backyard that I don't know if it's supposed to be mounted horizontal or vertical. So I just guessed horizontal, and hopefully that's right. But I was able to get a direct connection kind of like through a hill and some houses with
Nice.
this last night from about 5 miles away, with significant amounts of just things like between me and the receiver. So if you're looking for a very, very powerful combination, then this 5.8 dBi antenna with a adapter and then the Lily T Echo has been my de facto highly suspicious way of walking around and mapping what the absolute limits of reception are. I think in the future, I'm going to swap this out and have this connected to my house, and then instead walk around with a normal one of these guys, so that I stop having people thinking of carrying around like a baton or like a giant stick to like whack things with or like do crime. So favorite build I've done in a while. Definitely suspicious though. So if you're looking for a low-key build, this is not it. It is always attracting attention. All right, so next up on the stream, man, we've been talking about this so much, and it's funny and humbling to see another example. A Kia dealer portal flaw allowed you to do basically whatever you wanted to tons of vehicles, and these vehicles did not necessarily have active accounts. Meaning like the person involved like was not paying for connected services. This was something installed by default, turned on by the dealer, and then just left on. So this is the same group of hackers who already were showing off a number of vulnerabilities in connected cars. We covered this last year. This was a dozen car companies that had telematics installed that were vulnerable in various ways. And these were cloud attacks that like done with like Burp Suite and other tools we've covered on the stream before that basically figured out ways of exploiting the way these cars were connected and using the software to take commonly identifiable information like the license plate or the VIN number to log in and then perform services that were supposed to be reserved for the dealer, the driver, or actually there's not really, I don't know why you would need a lot of these services. It was
exactly.
So in this case, Kia was particularly vulnerable where car owners were having their sensitive information exposed and would also have the vehicles be able to be geolocated, remotely unlocked, started or stopped, honking the horn, or geolocate the vehicle. So here's a demo of the tool running. And basically what they were abusing was a tool for dealers to be able to associate with the car and then perform specific actions. So these elevated accounts allowed like an extensive amount of permission and were able to use just a random like Kia's license plate to access the system and do these things. I love the little car emoji on this. It's so cute. So this is definitely going to be my tool of the week. The fact that you could actually access these cars and not only track the owner like in an automated way, which is a privacy problem enough. Like if you're able to just look at someone's license plate, imagine someone with road rage issues being able to track down a Kia owner's exact movements like by just their license plate. There's all sorts of ways that this could be abused, obviously, aside from just stealing cars. So for domestic abuse things, for road rage people, this information shouldn't be available, but being able to use this admittedly very slick GUI to take a license plate and then use the cloud-based system to unlock the car does not surprise me at all. Frankly, this is the kind of research that we've been seeing affect more and more connected vehicles that were made recently. And here we see a remote command being able to unlock a fully locked Kia using just the license plate. And of course, the Kawaii, very cute interface here. So this tool was never released to the public and the vulnerabilities were fixed, but these sorts of underlying problems go unnoticed for very long periods of time, except by researchers and other people who poke around at this sort of stuff. So when people are interested in like car hacking and car security, this is where I tell them to go, like learning about cloud-based problems when cars are so deeply connected and have so many technologies woven into them. Like that's really where the interesting research is being done nowadays.
No, I agree. Well, James said starting a car doesn't always mean you can drive it. Well, maybe I have some sage advice for people who are worried about this. Just buy a manual transmission car. Nobody can drive those anymore anyway, so you're fine, even if they can turn it on.
Oh my God. Yeah, no, I'm not surprised. That's why I have bought all my cars off Craigslist, because even like seeing the trade-off we were talking about between having your personally identifiable information, like potentially either logged by the dealer or the manufacturer, or by a third party that they've chosen to install. And then like if you disable that, you don't have access to life-saving services. Like if you get in an accident, like that's the kind of modern trade-off that you have to make with newer cars. If you just buy an older car, then then it's not even a discussion.
Yeah. To James's point, my suspicion, without having like looked into this more or testing it, is it's probably the auto start stop function, as opposed to the driveway, because most of them, or at least most of the cars that I've seen, like if you open the door or whatever, it'll turn off after a certain amount of time. So you probably won't be able to drive it away. But again, who the heck knows? If the key isn't present. But then again, if it's that badly compromised, maybe it can disable the transponder like key exchange with the actual key or fob.
Yeah,
So
I just I always think of the ways that these could be abused, and like for the scariest thing is like if you could just remotely turn off any Kia that cuts you off in traffic, that's too much power. Like being able to just shut down a car because you're angry by the license plate, that is some true watchdog stuff. So yeah, I can see how this could be abused in all sorts of ways. Like the fundamental technology woven into cars nowadays is in some ways so vulnerable to the kinds of cloud attacks that we see all the time that if you're looking for juicy car hacking stuff, you might want to look more into cloud security than you are into like radio frequency stuff or some of the things we see associated with like car thefts that people are really afraid of. In many cases, you just need to trick the dealer into giving you access, or in this case, find a vulnerable API that accepts your like tokens instead of like dealer tokens to still perform protected actions. And you can get all the access and all the information you need to either track a vehicle, unlock it, stop it, or do a lot of these things that we typically associate with only the owner being able to do.
Papa says steering wheel locks. Are people still using those? Well, actually, Kia owners are after the when you can pop off the steering column and turn it on with like a USB key. So yeah. So yes, Kia owners are.
Yeah. All right. So next up, we have Tails OS merging with the Tor project. And this was sent in to me by James. So thank you for the heads up on Discord about the story. So Tails OS surprisingly was saying that the most difficult part of their expansion has been as they grow and as they are attempting to provide more services, do more things, actually being able to deal with HR stuff. So being able to take on staff, pay them, do all that back end stuff. Like they just, as a team of volunteers or as a, I guess, as a team that's still growing, like they just don't have the ability to really do that. And because they've been working so closely with the Tor project for a number of years, them combining and integrating better is something that makes a lot of sense for both of them. So I think that's cool. Like I already kind of associated like Tor and Tails because they do collaborate a lot and their stuff works really well together. So a lot of people who use Tails also use Tor within it. But obviously, if you're a hacker, you've probably heard of these before. But if not, then Tails OS is a privacy preserving OS. It's called what is it? They use like a funny term. Amnesic. Yeah,
that's
amnesic incognito. So amnesic meaning it's by default like designed to have amnesia. It's not supposed to remember anything, and it's supposed to make it so that when you're using the system, it preserves privacy as much as possible. It's a portable distro, so it's often used by people who want a temporary system that's going to preserve their privacy as much as possible and not have any technology in it that's designed to track them. Now, naturally, Tor, which is a networking tool that allows you to build secure routes that are privacy preserving through a number of nodes to make it difficult to track your internet usage, is deeply integrated into Tails. And it makes it so you can use the Tor browser or just route all traffic through Tor in order to preserve your privacy, even though it will set up red flags on any service you try to use. So my only criticism and why I don't use it myself as a daily driver is, like if you try to use this stack, every single program that is attempting to discern whether you're an attacker or not will flag you just to be, just because why not? And you won't be able to log into normal services like Gmail without tons of challenges. And some platforms will actually completely block your traffic. So aside from all that, this is something that a lot of people use to, do research, preserve their privacy. I teach this to journalists a lot to make sure that if they're researching like an individual that might have access to, data, that they're like maybe a government official or somebody else, they're able to do that in a way that's as secure as possible. So I like to see this collaboration. I think that it's good that they're combining resources, and it means that we're probably going to see better and deeper integration of the two services. So for people who care about privacy, this seems like a big win, but I'm curious to see if anybody has any other opinions about this merger. All right, so next up we have more action by the United States government going after crypto exchanges that have been found to facilitate money laundering. So there are specific rules that you have to follow in order to prove the identity of people that are using your services if you are a financial institution, if you're working with money. And in this case, the United States government is alleging that many of these crypto exchanges like Cryptex and others are simply laundering money and not providing the information necessary to stop ransomware actors from moving cryptocurrency that has been gotten through ransomware attacks through these exchanges. So because they're seen as fraud shops, the US government is basically sanctioning them so that if you are doing business with these entities, your assets are basically forfeit. They will just take your bank accounts. So if you are found to be trading on these, if you are found to be using them, they have been red flagged as moving money for criminals as one of their primary means of doing business. And as a result, anybody touching these crypto exchanges is potentially going to have their bank accounts seized. So that includes US citizens in particular. Obviously, it seems like these are based in Russia and probably don't have great enforceability in terms of just taking them down outright. But the US government has made it so that they are now radioactive, and anybody found to be dealing with them potentially will have their bank accounts forfeited. That's a big deal because they can actually enforce that against customers. So really, in this case, it seems like the action is more against the customers than the exchanges themselves, because the exchanges might be outside the jurisdiction of the US government.
Yeah, once the Office of Foreign Asset Control gets involved, you want to be far away from that.
Yeah, it certainly seems like a great way for the US government to just make a bunch of money by seizing accounts.
I mean, like North Korea does with all of their ransomware, so...
Yeah. So next up we have Firefox and Mozilla being accused of tracking people in ways that might violate GDPR. So this has been enabled by default without people's knowledge, and it's called privacy preserving attribution. Now, the core idea for this is they want to be able to, and the fact that it was jointly developed with Meta does not surprise me at all. But this was designed to track ads, and it's supposed to make it so people can measure, or companies can measure how their ads are tracked when people visit them in a way that aren't as bad, I guess, as cookies or some of the things that Google are proposing. It is not generally highly desirable to have like ad tracking stuff like running in your browser, because it means it's generating information about you. It's trying to create a profile, and it's trying to report back on how effective those ads were. So this being enabled without the user kind of consenting, it is a big deal. It's something that a lot of people are kind of concerned about. And NOYB, None of Your Business, has filed a privacy complaint with the Austrian, get them confused sometimes, data protection watchdog, which is why GDPR is involved. I guess I should have remembered that. But yeah, we'll have to see how this turns out. But generally, Firefox has a better reputation than Chrome for preserving user privacy. And some of the things that Google has presented as like a replacement for cookies are not very popular amongst people who care about privacy. So seeing that Firefox has gone down the same rabbit hole when it comes to working with Meta to develop something that's supposed to track reactions to advertisements, that can be abused in so many ways. And we've seen that done in the past to de-anonymize information that was supposed to be anonymous. So not particularly reassuring, even though Mozilla is describing it as a non-invasive alternative to cross-site tracking. It might be better than cookies, but it still does not fit the bill for a lot of people who weren't aware that they were being enrolled in this by default.
Yeah, I would kind of give Mozilla the benefit of the doubt to a certain extent on this. They have a track record of trying to do the right thing, and I sort of agree that this is probably better than the existing methods. They're going to track you one way or another. I get the lawsuit, but I don't know. This is I have mixed feelings about this one.
Yeah, I think it's just hard to get users to select that box, right? And opting people in by default is really, I think, the core of the problem here. Is like, of course, they've got to do this in order to provide like measurable like analytics and stuff like that. Like I understand that, but I guess the problem is for people who feel like Mozilla is the alternative, right? Like it's what you use if you care more about your privacy, and then you get to like make fun of people using Chrome. Having that feeling of smugness ripped away from you by being auto opted into yet another way of being tracked feels a little dirty. You know, the expectations were there that like they're going to ask you at least before doing that, and that's part of their mission. So the fact that it wasn't with consent, I think, is really the reason why people are upset about this. Because like I think, though, I understand that it's going to be very difficult for most people to opt into that unless it's buried in a way that people are associating with companies that are being kind of sneaky about that sort of thing.
Yep.
All right. So next up, Winamp. Wow, a blast from the past. So Winamp has open sourced. This is one of the most popular media players from the past, built in 1997 by Nullsoft. And this was purchased and repurchased, and recently they made a promise that they were going to open source this, so anybody who wanted to integrate newer technologies into this classic would be able to do so, and they followed through on that promise. Now, it has not been updated in some time, since I think 2013, so there's a lot of work to be done in order to integrate new technology into this. However, it is now available. So there are some limits to the licensing here. You can't just make a Winamp clone, update it a little bit, and then start selling it. The license does prohibit developing new products from it. Instead, they are trying to invite collaboration. So they want you to help preserve this and update this new open source project, not spin it off into a new closed source business. So I think that's probably fine, honestly. Like with the way that they've decided to open this up to anybody who wants to build a project. Like I think it's a more responsible way of like allowing the community to develop it. And I think that preventing people from just like closed sourcing it immediately and like making their own business off of it is a reasonable restriction. So if you were excited to make your own fork of Winamp, this might not be what you were waiting for. But if you do enjoy the project and you want to try modernizing it, then that is now something that you are more than welcome to do.
Bella Brandy says Winamp was the shiz back in the day. I agree. I have a lot of nostalgia seeing it again. I was definitely there when the old magic was spoken about, when it was written.
All right, so almost out of time today, but we've got a couple more subjects to go through. One of them is well, I guess this is kind of a two-part story. We also have CISA warning that industrial systems like water, for example, are being targeted using unsophisticated methods. And I love me some notices from CISA because in general, they're only putting out like really important information that's been sourced by working with industry partners. And in this case, they're saying that a lot of these systems are being targeted by just brute forcing and default credentials. So that's like the number one and number two thing that people are doing to gain access to these critical infrastructure systems. Now, what sorts of systems could possibly be impacted by this? Well, let's talk about the Kansas water plant cyber attack that has been forcing officials to switch to manual treatment. So a lot of these systems are connected, and if someone were to get into them and start to ransomware it or start to manually change the controls, then it can cause damage to the system, or it can also impact the water quality. Now, while that is not the case here, it was taken offline for an abundance of caution after access was detected here. This is the beginning of what could be more serious attacks. And because a lot of these Russian hacktivists have been going after critical infrastructure using these unsophisticated attacks, it's really important that anybody who's managing these systems take additional steps to make sure they're not easy targets, because the impact is so huge here. And the federal government is increasingly concerned about how these systems are connected to the internet and vulnerable. So again, it's not like highly sophisticated zero-day attacks here that are really making the news. It's instead low sophistication attacks against the most vulnerable targets that are exposed, that are causing real headaches for the government and also for critical infrastructure operators.
Hey, so the piece of advice for the week then is change your default passwords, I guess, before you plug stuff in, and maybe don't plug your water system in. I don't know.
Yeah, and just be ready to look for signs of intrusion, because if you've got all this stuff going on, it's going to take a while to remediate it, and just making sure that you're looking out for these attempts. Like it looks like that's what happened here. They detected unauthorized access and they shut down before a ransomware attack or before an attack that it impacted water quality. But that is kind of the best case scenario when it comes to being breached, is immediately detecting it and switching over to a backup system. Important steps being taken here to protect the public, but still something very dangerous when it affects something like the water. Obviously, electricity, there's other things that could be really, really serious if impacted as well.
James says you could overflow the water tower because somebody did it.
Yeah, that's something that when you have big systems that have like a lot of like water being held back, for example, like that could cause really serious problems, flooding, or also deplete a town's water supply during a critical moment. You don't have to spoil the water to ruin certain industrial systems, or very carefully manage things that don't have a lot of like buffer.
Ooh, we got a discussion heating up here. Benjamin says can't hack the floppy disk, and ACAT says the first virus was mailed out on a floppy disk.
That's true. Yeah, I'm not sure
hot
that
debate.
Backwards to protection here is going to be the best solution, but at least you'll have a smaller piece of malware to analyze, I guess. So speaking of malware, we have indications of some AI written malware in targeted attacks. And the reason why they think it's AI generated, I think, is particularly funny here.
This is good.
Typically, when you have malware, you're trying to make it as difficult to decode as possible, right? Like you want to obfuscate it, you want to hide it, you want to make it so that somebody can't just come in and figure out what it's doing. When you have like very thoroughly commented like malware that's in like the native language that was written, like it starts to look a little bit suspicious. That like maybe this was an AI system that was trying to be as clear as possible about what it was doing, and maybe it was writing that malware for someone who was an unsophisticated actor who wasn't able to do it themselves and would need those comments to understand exactly what was going on. So the choice to leave those in could be lazy, or it could be indications that someone is using an AI assistant to write things that are maybe a little bit beyond them. And with explicit instructions and the ability to have this written for you and tested a couple times, it seems like this is a pretty reliable, I guess, way of getting somebody who doesn't have the skills necessarily themselves to write a basic piece of malware that's targeting a specific or a specific individual. So there were other indications here that it might have been like an AI system, but in general, there's just the polite commenting in the user's native language, I think, is probably the strongest tell here. So if you were looking for indications that AI is kind of enabling cybercrime, it seemed like either somebody got their hands on an LLM that was unrestricted, or managed to do an escape here that allowed an AI assistant to write some malicious code, but it's not that difficult to do so. So I'm honestly not surprised to see it, and it's something that I expect that we'll start to see more often from now on.
Yeah, I've gotten them to write close enough to malicious code that, like, with a few simple tweaks, you could use it for nefarious purposes. So I'm not surprised. Not saying that right out of the box it'll make you, the nastiest piece of malware, but it'll get you right up to the line pretty easily, I feel like, without resorting to one that doesn't have restrictions. But again, it's all about how you prompt it and ask the questions.
Yeah, and the new models also have a lot of restrictions built into them, where the ChatGPT, like new alpha that has the agents that like ponder and do all the work and whatever, they are so locked down. Their ethical code and whatever else does not even allow you to craft arbitrary packets. Like it will not do anything related to cybersecurity. Like it just will not touch it. So I think that they learned that it was relatively easy to get that to happen before, and they've locked it down with like agents that in the chain of reasoning and thinking will explicitly ask questions about whether there could be any cybersecurity impact, and then disable any sort of response, even if it's an edge case. They're being really exhaustingly careful about it. But then just bouncing it back to an older model, or one that thinks less, asking it the same question, and then going to the other AI model and asking it to check my code, that worked. So there's still escapes. Like I found that like the new version of ChatGPT can still be tricked into upgrading, improving, and using its new reasoning power to add on to malicious code. And then use an older model to write like kind of sketchy code and be like, hey, I can't figure out why my code's not working, without giving it the explicit context of what the code is supposed to be doing. Kind of an interesting escape that I've been working with the last couple of days.
I'm gonna have to try that, because I haven't tried it recently, but that was one of the first things I did. Kody, are you going to show us any tools? Sorry to
well, I showed my custom Meshtastic hardware, and I also showed off my packet sorter. So if that was not enough for you, then the Q&A might be a better time for that, just because on this one anyway, we have so much news to go through that it's difficult to show off custom demos, many of which take like 10, 20 minutes, especially when we have like news dropping that was supposedly like a 9.9 like CVE. So got some other stuff to cover. But yeah, I don't generally do a lot of like Metasploit or Wireshark things like on the stream live because demos tend to fail. Like those are the ones that I tend to do separately. But I mean, like I try to fit them in whenever I find something that's broadly applicable, but making assumptions about what operating systems people are running to also excludes a lot of people. So I kind of have to be strategic about which ones I choose to do. All right, so next news story is MoneyGram. So this is like the second largest mover of money, aside from like Western Union. So MoneyGram is everywhere, and they have been reacting to a cyber attack for several days now. This is apparently since Monday morning. They actually confirmed that a cybersecurity incident was causing the system outage, and it appears to be a massive ransomware attack. So it's unknown exactly which systems were impacted, but out of caution, they've disconnected basically everything. Their website is down, their transfers are not operating, and people are complaining about not being able to use the service to access their funds. So this is a pretty big deal. Like as a company that their whole value is being able to have an easily accessible way of sending money to and from other people. A lot of people use this as a lifeline for relatives and others that absolutely need this service to work. So unclear exactly what is going on behind the scenes, but all signs point to a large ransomware attack impacting the second largest money courier in the business. So really, really big cybersecurity incident there. And last story of the week is going to be a proposed ban on connected vehicles from China and Russia. Now, I don't know how well known Russia is for their connected vehicles, but China is a major threat to U.S. electric vehicles, or at least the U.S. electric vehicle industry. And we've seen all sorts of legislation talking about like huge tariffs and requesting basically protection from this highly developed and very, very cheap Chinese alternatives to U.S. electric vehicles. So at this point, the U.S. government is making the national security argument that because these cars contain all of the technology we were just complaining about being used in the attacks on the connected cars, basically, you know, all cars in this current generation like use these sorts of technologies to provide services. The United States government is saying that these technologies represent an existential threat if they are delivered from Chinese or Russian companies and could map American infrastructure, allow hackers from those countries to access vehicles and use them as a proxy to do scanning and perhaps active attacks. So we were talking about how one evil light bulb, you know, could accidentally like infiltrate your system. Well, imagine one evil car being driven into a parking lot of a highly sensitive organization and being in range of maybe their Wi-Fi network. When there's a 0 day that let's say China or Russia knows about. Well, maybe in theory, the US government is saying they could use that car to relay, you know, an evil Wi-Fi packet via a malicious update and use any connected vehicle that has proximity or access to use their radio technologies or other technologies for evil. Now, like we have tracking available that makes it so you can track someone's face. Like we have like audio recording, like with microphones that could be happening. There's all sorts of ways that these connected technologies could potentially be used to surveil or perform attacks. And that's why the US government is saying that no, we're not just trying to protect the US auto industry. We are in fact trying to protect US citizens against this potential foreign threat. Now, obviously, US companies run rampant abusing these technologies to surveil people and do all sorts of other sorts of data collection. But of course, they're subjected to US law. So that's fine, I guess, even though there aren't very many of those. And they don't really govern what companies can't do. They more just tell companies that they can do kind of mostly whatever they want. And maybe they need to give you free credit monitoring if they lose their identity. So yeah, it's the argument here is a little confusing to me. It kind of seems like at first glance, like this is something that's more designed to protect US business interests than it is to protect cybersecurity, as there's tons of Chinese products that include these radio technologies that you know, aren't being considered for being banned. However, it does follow on the heels of the DJI drone bans that look like they might be getting passed. And the argument is fundamentally the same, that these devices contain technology which could potentially be abused by Chinese-based companies to either surveil or perform attacks in the United States. And the last story is boring, but we might as well cover it. Telegram has now changed their policy and is saying that it will share your IP address and phone number in response to legal requests if you are found to be violating the platform's terms of service. This was previously something that they claimed not to do, but it seems as though they are being a little bit extra cautious after their founder was arrested in France and is facing charges for facilitating all sorts of things that the platform was used for. So tightening up these policies is something that can kind of be expected after a stunt like that happens, but we can expect to see potentially more, I guess, surveillance or law enforcement friendly clauses being introduced in order to lessen the impact of any legal repercussions on Telegram or its agents. All right, so that is just about all the time we have for today. I'm going to be covering more on the simple add-on that I am creating that visualizes those packets for Hackaday SuperCon, which is coming up November 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in Pasadena. So if any of you are heading there, or if you're making your own simple add-ons, I would love to see them. If we didn't have time to cover your question or the tool that you wanted to see demonstrated, then you can always pop off on the Wednesday stream, especially if you leave a comment. Often I'll see those on the YouTube channel and have time to work on a demo or something else like that. Again, I don't do a ton of demos on the stream unless the tool is pretty broadly applicable and generic, but I'll still do it. I tend to save those for other breakout episodes, but I always do like to cover interesting tools. All right, so if you want to support the stream, then we definitely appreciate it. You can always go to Varonis.com/Kody. That's Kody. It lets everyone at Varonis know you want us to keep doing the stream, keep going to events, and that you appreciate what we do. It doesn't cost you anything, but it does let them know that you want the stream to keep broadcasting twice a week, every week, covering security topics, and also the Q&A on Wednesday. So with that, I guess that's it for this week. Have a good weekend, everyone, and we'll be back next week to talk about everything. Hopefully this weekend is a quiet one after that 9.9 Linux vulnerability disclosure. Seeing the other shoe drop with macOS is probably going to be the #1 thing that I have my eye on all weekend. So I think I'm just going to disable the printing service on my macOS device until then. But yeah, if you're waiting for more information on that, then it does seem like it's worth keeping an eye on over the weekend. So we'll update you again on Wednesday. All right. Goodbye, everyone. Have a good one.
Take care.